Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends from around the globe, a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining this opening session of the international webinar series entitled New Perspectives on Collective Healing, Social Justice and Wellbeing. This is co-convened by the UNESCO Roots of the Enslaved Peoples Project and the Global Humanity for Peace Institute at the University of Wales, Trinity St David. My name is Chateau Gill. I'm the director of the Institute, and I'm honored to be moderating today's session. This series contains 7 monthly webinars, bringing together diverse voices of distinguished and inspirational speakers, including scholars, researchers, activists, and practitioners. The purpose is to provide in-depth analysis of the need for collective healing following historical atrocities and brutalities, and to reflect on the ways that communities, institutions, and governments might collaborate to address the legacies of dehumanization and support the well-being of all. To introduce this series of webinars and to present today's speakers, let's welcome Professor Medwyn Hughes, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Wales, Trinity St David.
As the oldest Royal Chartered University after Oxford and Cambridge, cultural engagement and resilience is at the heart of what we do. For we believe in the interconnectedness of cultural diversity and building coalitions and resilience across the cultures of the world. And that is why I pay tribute to the outstanding work that UNESCO have undertaken over the last 30 years in developing their Roots of Enslaved Peoples project. The commitment and dedication of UNESCO has been key to making sure there is a common understanding and a common engagement on this important subject. I also want to pay tribute to the work in developing the General History of Africa project that gives a clear voice to a very complex, diverse history spanning thousands of years and encompassing countless cultures, language, and traditions. And at the heart of that is the real commitments to identify what brings us together in a common language, a common culture, a single humanity that focuses on the individual at the heart of a civilized society. We applaud UNESCO's work, and we pay tribute today to the real important study of collective healing, of focusing on social justice, and developing a global understanding of our responsibility, of our role in securing equity and developing a common understanding on these key subjects. I'm so pleased that later we will have the privilege to listen to Gabriela Ramos and Zina Badawi, 2 key individuals that have been at the heart of this dialogue and have led, not only have led with distinction, but also with compassion. And I welcome you and I thank you for engaging in this seminar. This afternoon, we will have the opportunity to hear about the journeys of so many individuals that have been engaged in this particular engagement of focusing upon collective healing of social justice and global well-being. At the heart of this is a common view, a common mind, that every story counts, every culture counts, every individual telling his or her story based upon traditions of generations of engagement has the right to be heard and to be respected. As Vice-Chancellor of the National University of Wales, I am so pleased that we are playing our small part in facilitating this story. And I wish you well in your deliberations and look forward to working with you in the future as we continue on our journey to tell the story and to enshrine resilience at the heart of all we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice-Chancellor, for sharing the university's commitment to supporting this meaningful and extremely timely series of webinars. Well, as you have already alluded to, these webinars should provide invaluable space for for exploring the shifting landscape of knowledge, cultural wisdom, resiliency, and practice, especially to challenge racism, to promote social justice and well-being. And one of the world's greatest advocates of anti-racism, equality, and inclusive and peaceful societies is Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, UNESCO Assistant Director General for the Social and Human Sciences, who will now provide the opening remarks for today's session. Assistant Director General, welcome.
Great to be with you today. Great to be with Chair Tugil and also with the Vice Chancellor of Wells Trinity St. David's, Professor Huch, and also with our dear friend Zainab Badawi. All of them great champions for equality. Of course, express my appreciation of UNESCO to our partner, the Garant Hermes Foundation for Peace. Together, UNESCO with the foundation, we are working hand in hand to shed light on the history of enslavement and the slave trade, and to develop solutions to fight racism through the healing and understanding. And we know this is, of course, an academic endeavor. This is research that is necessary. This is to advance always remembrance of the tragedy of the slave trade. But it's also to understand what are the legacies of that past history to what we see today in our societies. And we know that systemic racism continues to, in their different expressions. We know that this prevents racialized people from accessing the opportunities they deserve, be it on health, be it on mental care, on education. And we know that we need to address this very urgently. The data is there everywhere around the world. People that are racialized have less chances in life. In the United States, only 25% of African Americans seek mental health treatment, for example, compared to 40% of white Americans. However, African Americans teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers, and therefore they need a special support. In February this year, the Washington Post explained how the consequences of racial discrimination damages the brain of Black people and other minorities, because our brains can learn to adapt, but it becomes at a very high cost. And why do we say this? Because we know that while a little bit of stress may help us to be reactive and to be well prepared to respond to fears, problems arise when stress is persistent, as the direct and indirect effects of racism that puts this stress on the shoulders of people that are being discriminated. And this is especially true for women, who report a 4% higher level of stress than men. A 2022 scientific study carried by the University of California with white, Black, Hispanic, and Asian people reported that discrimination and racism were connected with anxiety and depression. For Black and Hispanic individuals, discrimination was also associated with altered brain connectivity linked to physiological coping and mental health. And racism, with all these dramatic consequences for people, is not only about people, it's also about our communities, it's about our societies, it's about our progress as humanity, because at the end, racism has an economic cost, and we're also working with the foundation on this issue. And we know that the cost of racism can reach even the trillions, 16 trillions, according to a report in 2020 that was produced by CTGPS Group, accounting for the discrimination in the US for the latest 20 years. But it's not only the US, I think that everywhere around the world, we are facing this problem. And so how can we eliminate it? Of course, from UNESCO, from an international institution that is working with member states, first we need to legislate equality. We are still in the world where legislations can officially discriminate, as we have now the girls in Afghanistan that cannot go to schools by law. And therefore, it's very important that we move forward with legislation. We also need to move forward with institutions and with capacities to ensure that people is not classified, is not essentialized, is not discriminated, and that we address the needs of their communities independently of their origins. We need to engage also communities to discuss needs and design impactful solutions to deconstruct racial biases which lead to discriminatory practices. And of course, understanding history and promoting healing from psychological traumas can be a powerful way to eliminate racism. But to change mindsets, we must also teach the history of enslavement and destructive legacy it has left behind. I was glad, for example, to see that the French government launched their anti-racism national strategy, and they included by all children in schools to visit sites of memory, to remembering the fate of all these enslaved people and the suffering so that we don't repeat it again. And we need to develop and implement bulletproof policies in all areas and all levels. And on this, we are glad to inform you that UNESCO has scaled up its work against racism and discrimination in the context of COVID that magnified all these trends. Member states call on us to really deliver much better results. We launched a roadmap against racism and discrimination, and we also launched the Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination, which provides a unique platform. I invite you to join us because it provides a unique platform for international cooperation in a multi-stakeholder fashion and to share knowledge, best practices for partnerships and craft the way forward. We were pleased, for example, that in the past edition of the forum in Mexico in November, we have results as relevant as the launching of the North American Partnership for Racial Equity between the governments of Mexico, the US, and Canada, that then was elevated to a leaders level summit in North America, and UNESCO was asked to follow up and to monitor these agreements because, as we know, agreements are fantastic, delivery is much better. On the other hand, our program that is turning 35, the Routes of Enslaved Peoples, will be celebrating this anniversary in 2024, next year. So I invite you all to bring together new ideas to try to advance the understanding of the history of enslavement and highlight the contributions of the enslaved people, but also highlight how is it shaping also the way we react nowadays. The third Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination will take place in Sao Paulo this year, so you are all invited. We need all the forces, we need all hands on deck to really push this agenda forward and move out of racism. And we also are going to be advancing the general history of Africa that Zainab was so kind to support in the dissemination in the past years, because the general history of Africa is really looking at how can the history of African countries can be told, not only in terms of the recent past, but also way back when we have so many issues forging on the cultural identity, the development of self-confidence and self-esteem, and contributing to the healing process. And so I want to thank, as I said, Zainab, because she developed a very nice series based on the general history of Africa for the BBC World. We will continue working on these areas, but we're also working on the digital space. We have the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, because the problem now is that the discrimination that we see in the analog world is just being exacerbated in the digital world. We know that algorithms can discriminate. They can be sexist or racist, and we have seen that in the latest chat box. And therefore, it's very important that we again put the ethical guardrails, the policies, the legislation, the mindset to combat this very important problem. And then, of course, use all the means we have. Use education as we do in UNESCO, sports as we do in UNESCO against discrimination, and continue pushing for delivery a better world for our people. And of course, and the reason why we are here today, UNESCO and the Grand Hermes Foundation for Peace are equipping young facilitators in Ghana, in Jamaica, Nigeria, Colombia, the UK, the Netherlands, and the US, so that they can provide their communities with expertise and the resources to offer intergenerational healing from the psychological traumas inherited from the history of enslavement and the slave trade. Our program creates constructive dialogues between the descendants of the former slave peoples and those who benefited from enslavement. I think it's really a beautiful program, really well defined and in good shape. And so this promising program and the webinar series that we are launching today with UNESCO's global work to combat racism and discrimination, we hope that we will be advancing this agenda, changing the context, but also changing the mindset to achieve inclusive policies. And I count on you and I count with your work to help us make this happen. Thank you so much and looking forward to the continuation of this very important debate.
Wow, what inspirational words, Assistant Director General. Thank you so much for your leadership in pursuing equality and ensuring caring for the well-being of all. I think this audience, myself especially, are comforted that you are encouraging us to take a global and collaborative journey forward towards freedom, emancipation, and above all, systemic transformation. So we look forward to you returning shortly to join our keynote speaker and unpack some of these topics. Now, it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome today's keynote speaker, Zainab Badawi. Zainab is an award-winning international journalist, is well known for her work in programs such as Hard Talk and Global Questions. What makes Zainab a perfect keynote presenter for today's session, as Mrs. Ramos already hinted, her introducing to the world the so-called UNESCO's best-kept secret, the general history of Africa. A historian, Zainab, yourself, you have produced and presented a major 20-part TV series on the history of Africa and is currently writing a book on the same topic. Here to discuss new perspectives on history of Africa and its importance to a promising global future, please welcome Zainab Badawi.
Thank you very much indeed, Sherto. Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Gabriella, very nice to see you, and Vice Chancellor Professor Medwin Hughes, very good to be with you, and everybody else, of course, on this webinar, wherever you may be. Yes, Sherto, I think that UNESCO have got what I once described as one of the best kept secrets of the world, which is this huge bank of knowledge. And I remember, Gabriella, when I visited UNESCO in 2015, and I was sitting in the office of one of your predecessors, Getachew Ngida, Ethiopian-born Deputy Director General of UNESCO, when Irina Bokova was Director General, and chit-chatting to him about something or the other. And behind him, where he was sitting, there was a bookcase, and it had these volumes, 9 at the time, there are now 10, and it was the General History of Africa. And I said to him, Getachew, what are those? And he said to me, oh, it's Africa's history, written by and large by Africans themselves. And for those people on the webinar who may not know very much about the general history of Africa, it's a remarkable project which was undertaken in the early 60s by UNESCO on behalf of African leaders who has said, look, we have decolonized our countries, we want to decolonize our history. So they scoured the continent of Africa for the best anthropologists, historians, archaeologists, you name it, and they compiled volume after volume of Africa's history written from an African perspective, which is why this fits in so well with this webinar, which is new perspectives on justice and well-being and healing, because the history is important for people of African descent, but also for everybody, because African history is part of our global story. So when we talk about justice, yes, we're talking very much now increasingly about the issue of reparations for communities and countries that suffered from the transatlantic slave trade. certainly in the United Kingdom, this debate is gathering so much momentum. In the United States, there is a bill which is a bit stuck in the Senate at the moment, but the Democrats have been pushing it through to look at this issue of reparations. So I think that is very important from the perspective of justice. But I think that, and healing. But I think what particularly interests me is this issue of well-being, because there's a lot to celebrate about being African. And I think that to cast people of African descent simply as, victims, of course, there is racism everywhere in the world, but we are much more than just being the victims of racism. We have a wonderful past, which we must also celebrate, because, you cannot dismantle the ideology on which racism is based, which is people of African descent or Africans living in Africa today are inferior simply because they are African. You can't dismantle this bastion of racism without actually explaining who the African people are, and to say that they have a history and institutions and traditions and customs which are worthy of respect. And that is why in constructing new perspectives, you have got to put the African intellectual, the African intelligentsia center stage. They really are pretty absent from the global stage. And we all need to understand that African history is part of our global story. So I think that in elevating the story of Africa and becoming an advocate for it, which is what I have been trying to do with my series and now the book, I think that it really does feed into this debate we're having about justice, about reparations, about healing, about tackling racism in all its manifestations all over the world. Because I'm very much reminded of what the wonderful late Kenyan environmentalist Wangari Maathai, who died in 2011. She received, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for her visionary work on the environment. And she said, you cannot enslave a mind that knows itself, that understands itself, that values itself. And so in trying to combat racism, yes, we've got to call it out where we see it. We've got to make sure our institutions are free of it. But we've also got to ensure that the victims and potential victims of racism also understand who they are, so that they gain perspectives which give them confidence to go out and forge their own place in the world. And that's why I think what she says is so important. And I think that what I try to do with the TV series, 21-hour programs, more or less 1 hour, is to go right back to the beginning, to the origins of humankind, way back before the transatlantic slave trade, centuries and centuries before, to just say, all corners of Africa had a history. Contrary to what a lot of historians, particularly those in the West from decades gone by, might have thought, when they said there's no history in Africa except once the Europeans arrived. And, I traveled to more than 30 countries when I made this series, and I spoke to dozens and dozens of intellectuals in every country. And I was very struck by the fact that wherever I went, I had to tear myself away from the historians I spoke to at universities, the anthropologists, the archaeologists, because they were so hungry to tell their story from their own perspective. Because, African history has been occluded, or people pick it up only from the transatlantic slave trade. And I knew I was onto something when these people would just talk at great length to me, and I couldn't do justice to their perspectives in a TV series, which is why I've now started embarking. Well, I've almost finished it. This book, and using the inspiration really that they gave me, and also how they would use different sources from Western historians, looking at custom, oral tradition, and so on. You can build up a really much more rich picture of Africa's history. So I'm very grateful to UNESCO that they allowed me to use this wonderful source of their volumes as my inspiration. Of course, I had to do more research, and I spoke to a lot of people in the countries that I visited. But I think that the guidance I received from the team, the Africa team at UNESCO at the time, people like Dr. Ali Musa, who was born in Djibouti, the wonderful Professor Augustin Hole, Cameroonian-born archaeologist who's the president of the Scientific Committee of the General History of Africa, really great intellectuals. Their guidance really was so important to me in trying to fashion this history of Africa from the African perspective. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Halima Mokhlanti, who was the vice president of South Africa. I was having tea with him in central London a few years ago, and he said to me, we have a saying in Africa, which is, when the lions have historians, then the hunters will cease to be heroes. And I think that the heroic, the brave, the wonderful, rich history of Africa is a history that deserves to be better known throughout the world. And I think even me as an African myself, I was surprised at just how little I knew about the history of my own country, the Sudan, way back. And it was something I found right across the continent, that even the people of Africa themselves didn't really have a clear picture of the continent historically. So I think that when we're talking about new perspectives on justice, healing, and well-being, we must include this account of Africans' history and identity, including those who live in the diaspora. And I think I've said enough, but hopefully we can have a conversation with people on the webinar if they want to ask me any questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zainab, for your extraordinary dedication to giving voice to the stories of peoples of African descent, and the building and awareness of the rest of the global community about these stories. It reminds me of a comment that James Baldwin had made about history. And he says, history does not only refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we're carrying it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways. And history is literally present in all that we do. It could scarcely be otherwise, he says, since it is to history that we owe our frames of reference, our identity, and our aspiration. So how true these are reflected in the stories you told about Africa. It is of critical importance to the global humanity because it also offers a narrative of ingenuity, resilience, and diversity, and illustrates a significant role Africa can play and has played in shaping the world we live today.
Yes.
So,
Actually, Sherto, you're absolutely right. When I was in Ghana, I was talking to a wonderful man who was guiding me around the old slave forts. And he said, actually, there should be a debate in Africa itself about the transatlantic slave trade. I don't think there has been enough of a debate, but he said that there are still parts in his part of Ghana where people don't live there, decades later, because they're like, if you go and live there, the slave traders are going to come and take you away. So to this day, he said, there's that memory. And of course, there's this new area of study, which Professor Augustin Hole talked to me about, epigenetics, just to see, you know, the impact that the transatlantic slave trade had on those communities. And as you rightly say, as James Baldwin picked up, it still continues to this day. And another fact that I uncovered, which I found fascinating very quickly, which is on a much lighter note, but it's interesting, which is the ancient Kushites in Sudan didn't eat fish from the River Nile. And to this day, Sudan has a much lower consumption of fish, 1 kilogram on average per person. In Egypt, it's 20 kilograms on average per person. So you can see that a civilization that existed before the Common Era, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, still has an impact today. So yes, he's absolutely right. History is relevant today.
Yes, well, in fact, your work, by referring to all these stories, your work has served to connect and reinforce a UNESCO notion of global Africa. So maybe it's time that we invited Mrs. Ramos back and to return to the screen and for a much anticipated dialogue between Zainab and Assistant Director General of UNESCO.
Zainab and Gabriela. And Zainab, it's so great to see you in this function. You and I work hand in hand to launch the Inclusive Growth Agenda in the OECD. So it's we always cross paths, and if it's through Cherto Guild that we reconnect, is fantastic. And I could not agree more with you in the sense that all these different voices of how we see ourselves, how do we read our history, how do we put it together to make sense of who we are, is so important. And it's so important to give the voice back to those that experience history before, as you say, the colonization and the arrival of the Europeans. And I was just reading from the 10 volumes that you mentioned, and congratulations. I'm so proud. I want to see all of your videos that you have made, all these fantastic films. We need just to replay them to continue debating on these issues, because it's not over. It's just not over. I think it's really important that we continue spreading the word of what does it mean to be African. What does it mean when you refer to the past history? I was reviewing some of the elements that we have in those books, and I just discovered that there was this, of course, rich kingdom that mastered iron and drafted the first human rights text. It's just amazing. The 13th century,
yes,
the Africans drafted the Mandan Declaration. The Mandan Declaration is now inscribed in the UNESCO list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And imagine 13th century, it was advocating for social peace in diversity, the abolition of slavery, and freedom of expression and trade. Doesn't it sound fantastically close? So,
yes.
so I want to ask you, Zainab. You have talked about some of the lessons learned. We are now working to advance not only the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Enslaved Peoples Route program, where you are invited next year, but also we are finishing the 3 additional books on the history of Africa with the African diaspora, with the contributions of Africa, even in the terrible situation of slavery. They really made fantastic contributions to our world, to the new world. So what would be your lessons? What would you like to share with the audience here in terms of this experience and how we take it forward?
You mean how you take forward the general history of Africa?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I've gone through the volumes, and obviously they are, very solid books. And what I try to do with my series, and what I'm trying to do with this book, is to really make it more digestible. And I think that, I know UNESCO have been working on a pedagogical element to the general history of Africa, but I think that, UNESCO really needs to have a very strong advocacy role in elevating the whole project, and its significance. And I think the time is right. I mean, as I said, it started in the 60s, very much ahead of its time. But I think the zeitgeist is very much with it. There's a real hunger for Africans to know more about the history of their own continent. And actually, even non-Africans, I think, are, wanting to know how Africa is part of the global story. So I don't know if that's the question you were asking me there, Gabriella, or not. Oh, you're on mute.
That's it, because actually you have been I guess that you are one of those that, besides those that wrote the history and those that were linked to it, that has really gathered a lot of expertise and understanding of how important it is to disseminate this view of the world. But I also want to link it, Zainab, with the work that we're doing with Sherto and the university, with the Vice Chancellor, because it's about history, but it's also about the uses of history to understand today and to dissect the fact that we continue to have racism as an expression that is everywhere. We continue to have the legacies of that past. And therefore, of course, we need to push forward the history of Africa to change mindsets. But at the end, it's true that the current socioeconomic structures are still oppressive to certain communities. And one of those areas in which I feel we can make a lot of progress, and you being in the media industry, is the social networks with the young people that are always connected. So this is a very non-related issue, but how can we reach out to those very advanced modes of communication with the young people always connected? And this goal that we have to make the history of Africa, the route of enslaved people, the healing project that we're working in terms of this intergenerational understanding, to build more inclusive societies. What's your advice there, Zainab?
I think that unity is very, very important. And I think if UNESCO could act as a kind of rallying cry for people of African descent, as well as those living in the continent, and perhaps generating a debate using academic institutions, or setting up, to gain momentum somehow, to take the lead in gaining momentum on this debate, particularly amongst young people, because we saw how in 2015 students, in South Africa were demanding a decolonization of their curriculum. And we've seen that in universities here in the UK, where I'm based, that people want a more honest, more inclusive, approach to the telling of Africa's story. And you can't really jump on the train now, in a sense, without really claiming it right from the beginning of the journey, which is why going all the way back through history is important. But I think, as I said earlier on, that a lot of the basis on which racism and racist practices still persist is that there is this kind of, stamp put on people of African descent as somehow being lesser still in many cases. Not everybody, of course. I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of very good initiatives that are tackling racism by people of all colours. But I think that ideology has got to be tackled, which ascribes this, you see it in a certain extent in the United States, that African Americans are seen as the descendants of slaves, and people don't really see past that. And that's why I think that they, engaging with influential diaspora communities, such as in the United States, with their public intellectuals or their institutions, would be, I would have thought, useful territory for UNESCO to explore.
We will continue on that vein, and of course, with champions like you, champions like Sherto, I think that we can make it. It's a long way to go, but I think it's worth walking together and trying to really change the mindsets. Great to be in this conversation with you. Hoping to see you in the different stages of the activities that we will be launching. And back to you, my dear Sherto.
Thank you so much. And it seems like the audience has been really active. They put in comments and questions and comments about different multicultural healing and multicultural. Maybe she was saying that multicultural approach to healing. This is something they would like you to comment on. Another is about the systems are designed to be discriminatory. I think that's a question to you, Mrs. Ramos. And what system are we putting in place separately from the current ones to promote safe and healthy environment for those who are constantly being discriminated? In fact, this is a work that you championed for a long time. And I'll just go through some of the questions that maybe you would, both of you will think about them and pick some kind of, either answer a specific question or just give some general comments given the time constraint. Another question is, this is from someone from Richmond, Virginia, who's on our intergenerational dialogue pilot with UNESCO. And Alan Charles says, how do we heal the damage to personal identity that has been done to enslaved people groups or their descendants who have oriented themselves around, Zainab, using your word, the hunter's history? And so on. So there are these good questions coming along. Maybe you would like to take a little time, just make some general comments.
I mean, I think on your first one about multicultural healing and understanding, I do think that we don't just say, oh, people of African descent and people living in Africa need to know about their history. As I said, African history is part of our global story. I mean, you go so far back because everybody came out of Africa that actually everybody is an African export, if you think about it, because, human beings originated in Africa. So in a sense, Africa's history is everybody's history, that they should know about it. And I think that when it comes to understanding, and understanding will always promote, I think, a better, coexistence and people. I don't think we should set Africa's history in opposition to American or European history or whatever. It's just to say, they're not in opposition, they're not competing narratives as such. It is, as I said, just adding and acknowledging that actually, if you go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you want to hear a perspective from a Congolese person, be they a historian, an expert, or whatever. And that's a true sense of the word multicultural. So that's how I would interpret multicultural healing. I mean, the damage done to individuals' sense of personal identity and to people who are descended from enslaved groups. I mean, I think that's a very real issue, and as I said, it's an area of study about which I don't know a great deal, but I think that people are beginning to look at this area of epigenetics just to see what the impact has been on communities and individuals, obviously. And Gabriella referred to that, to what extent the mindset needs to be shifted so that they have an alternative way of asserting their identity, which is a more positive one, which is one which allows them to hold their heads high. As Wangari Maathai said, you can't enslave a mind that knows itself, that understands itself, that values itself. And so you tell people whose personal identity might have been affected that actually you have a history that is a valuable one, that's worthy of respect.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think this is a very nice entry because worthy of respect. I think this is the core, worthy of respect or equal respect, I will say. And your question, Sherto, that the public put in terms of what systems, no? How do we build systems that replace the racist systems? I have to say that I wish it was so black and white. The reality is that humanity has made a lot of progress. For once, slavery doesn't exist anymore. Second, we are equal against the law. In the majority of countries, it's illegal to discriminate and it's sanctioned to discriminate. But we know that the outcomes are not the way we want them. And therefore, as I said at the beginning, it's very important to know about history, as Zainab has mentioned, the whole getting into understanding other cultures, other past, where people come from, make it human, because at the end, history is about human beings that had certain experiences and that we can understand where they come from and where they're going for. But I also think that is very important, and I love this question of epigenetics, because at the end, it brings the uniqueness of human beings, not only in terms of the soul and the heart and the brain, but the whole together that delivers some kind of personal development or not, or impaired development or not. And therefore, this is really important. But I really want to share with you that one area where I feel is very exciting is when we work with young people with our master classes, because we start telling them, how do you become a racist? Sometimes we don't even understand that we are becoming a racist, because sometimes we classify people, we essentialize people, we go to prejudice, we repeat prejudices, and then we just exclude some groups from the others. And I think that is very important that we do also this self-reflection, and that we equip our new generations with all of the elements, all of the tools that they need to have to avoid falling into these dynamics. It's very easy to fall, and the message to our young generation is to recognize what is happening, stand against racism. When you see it happening, the bystander is as guilty as those that perpetrate acts of racism and discrimination. And therefore, I think it's very important that we continue pushing a better understanding of these issues and self-reflection on how much we can be and should be inclusive in the world of today. So I think there's a lot of work on the frameworks, but it's also a lot of work on the mindsets.
Some of the people in the audience, and Zainab, you'll be very happy to hear that Ali Moussaie is joining us in the audience. And so some of the work that are done by people of African descent, either as researchers, as scholars, and public figures and leaders, are really setting great examples. And I just want to take Ali Moussa's project and his Afrospective, and they have collaborated with us last year to look at African indigenous approach to governance. That basically it is seemed to be a new approach to democracy, but it is very much embedded in the African tradition, and it's reverberation and echo in the global Africa. It's kind of a participatory democracy at its best. So these kind of active examples and case studies really help highlight the voice of the community, but also give rise to the fact that there are practice out there that deserve our attention.
Absolutely. I mean, I know Ali Moussa well, and hello, Ali, if you can hear me. And I think this initiative is an excellent one. Long awaited. I also sit on the advisory board of the Mandela Institute for Development Studies, MINDS, which is chaired by Graça Machel. And, they're very much, we again try to advance this idea of, forging a path ahead for Africa based on its own customs, traditions, institutions, and not just trying to inherit and put wholesale Western traditions, but to use a lot of the positive elements of African society, be it the justice system or whatever, for Africa to find its own voice and its own future. So yes, I applaud those kind of things. And I mean, Gabriella mentioned the Mandi Charter at the beginning, which was founded, the founder of the Mali Empire in the 1230s in what we now call that part of West Africa, which is almost a forerunner of the French, fraternity and equality and unity and so on. I mean, it was an oral charter, but it certainly laid down a kind of, civic rights, human rights framework. So that's a very good example of how Africa's got very strong traditions to fall back on forged as early as the early 13th century in this particular example.
Exactly. And equally, like Madame Ramos has highlighted, youth and the future leaders of humanity need to be nurtured. And their leadership must be considered as part of the healing and the well-being. And so UNESCO has been taking a lead in supporting young people, and under the Mrs. Ramos' leadership, we have embarked on the intergenerational dialogue, as you have highlighted at the beginning. And when young people and the elders in the community come together, this is to bring the history into the present, and through identify resilience and innovative practice, and between in the dialogue between the young and the elderly, we have laid out some of the path from the community towards a more sort of flourishing future. And I think, given today's time, I want to thank you, both of you, taking this precious moment to share and to dialogue. And this audience is very grateful. Many have offered their talent to UNESCO and in joining us in co-creating a great global human world. So thank you, Mrs. Ramos. Thank you, Zeina. And thank you to all the excellencies and distinguished guests and friends and colleagues from around the globe for this excellent session. And next time, as our speakers have already highlighted, we're going to hear Dr. Joy de Guru and Thomas Hubel, who will start from the epigenetics and the importance of intergenerational transmitted trauma, but equally healing. Thank you to all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.